All right, Brother Kyle, you ready?
Yeah, ready. So we'll be live in 2 minutes.
2 minutes, right? Okay, right.
Yeah, sure.
All right, Brother Kyle, you ready?
Yeah, ready. So we'll be live in 2 minutes.
2 minutes, right? Okay, right. All right, Brother Kyle, you ready?
Yeah, ready. So we'll be live in 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, brothers and sisters in Christ, and welcome again to St. Christopher's Church here in Siparia. And on behalf of the parish, we want to welcome you to our week of teaching. And we pray that God in His mercies will be with us as we open our minds to learn. We certainly are happy to join with all other persons throughout the diocese live on Anglican also. I am Father Aaron Charles, the priesthood responsibility for this parish. So thank you for joining us once again. Let us pray as we ask God's presence to be with us. And I will use a prayer of thanksgiving on page 35 as we give God thanks for the wonderful week that we had thus far, and of course for a beautiful weekend that we intend to have as we right? So sorry about that again. We have our little challenge down on the side here. So we thank you for blessing us with family and friends and for the loving cares that surrounds us on every side. We thank you for setting us tasks which demands our best efforts and for leading us to our accomplishments which satisfies and delights us. We thank you also for those disappointments and failures that leads us to acknowledge our dependency on you alone. Above all, we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, for the truth of his word and the example of his life, for his steadfast obedience by which he overcame temptation, for his dying through which he overcame death, and for his rising to life again, in which he risen to life of your kingdom. Grant us the gift of your Holy Spirit, that we may know Christ and make him known, and through him at all times and in all places may give thanks to you in all things. Amen. Today for reading, it is key for me to, based on some discussion that I had before this serious topic, is to highlight something from our catechism. And today I will just do a slight reading about the teaching of the church. And those who have the prayer book in front of them will be page 392. And we are talking about what is our duty to our neighbors. Our duty to our neighbors is to love them as ourselves and others and do them no harm. To love, honor, and to help our parents, our families, and to respect those in authority. To show respect for the life God has given us, to work and pray for justice and peace, to bear no malice, prejudice, or hatred in our hearts, and to strive for a just and a proper use of God's creation. To respect God and our neighbor in our sexual behavior. To be honest and fair in our dealings, to seek justice, freedom, and necessities of life for all, and to use God's gift of our talents and possessions as persons who must answer for them to God. To speak the truth and not be misled by others by our silence. To resist the temptation of envy, greed, and jealousy. To rejoice in other people's gifts and talents, and to do our duty for the love of God, who have called us into fellowship with him. Today, I'll take this opportunity. It's my esteemed pleasure to welcome our guest speaker today. Her name is Onika Henry. She's a trained educator, facilitator, counselor, and theater arts with the university qualifications in theater arts, psychology, human sexuality. She uses her combinations of specialties for the benefit of her clients and students in an environment that is healthy, fun, productive, and most of all, safe and non-judgmental. Ms. Henry was a 2009 TED Export Spain speaker. She is a regular she regularly contributes to the writing in Trinidad and Tobago Newsday's newspaper, the co-founder of the top performing arts company in Tobago, as well as a trainer of sexual health facilitator. She volunteers at a few NGOs, including Tobago, Only Halfway Home for ex-prisoners and deportees. As a strong proponent of theater and development and applied art, she actively uses the arts as a tool for social and behavioral change. So it is my pleasure to thank you for accepting this invitation, highly recommended by one of our youths, Cordell. And I thank you for accepting it, and I look forward for your unbiased and real discussion, which is so needed in our church and in our community. So I now hand it over to you to proceed in your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father Charles. So let me just make sure that everyone can hear me clearly. If you can, just put a yes in the chat Or if you want to mute and say, yes, you can hear me clearly. Nice, I see a thumbs up from Cordell. All right, Sharon is hearing me. Okay. All right, good. I'm seeing the thumbs up. All right, thank you, Marsha. Thank you, Natasha. All right, so I have lots and lots that I want to share. And I'm in my office and I have to get home from here after, well, to get home before curfew. So let me start right away. I'm going to share my screen. I am going to ask for a few things. One, that you give yourself an open mind, that you put away all the stories, assumptions, an assumption that you have in your mind about what this is going to be, about what to expect. And there will be time for questions and perhaps sharing. And because I want this space and this time to be a safe and a brave space, I'm going to ask that we all respect each other's views and each other's sharing, that we see the information with fresh eyes from multiple perspectives, and assume good intention. All right, assume good intention from all. So let's begin. I'm going to share my screen, pull up the PowerPoint. All right. Is everyone seeing my screen? Can I ask for an assistant to check the chat box for questions and let me know? Father Charles, do you want to do that, or would somebody from the ICT team do that?
Yes, we will share it along as we go along. People will put it in the chat in the Zoom, so they will
Right.
see it.
Okay, good. So whatever I'm missing, you could point out to me. All right, nice. All right, let me get this straightened up here. Yes. All right, so from current slide. So we're going to go through an introduction to human sexuality. I'm going to read a few little vignettes, and from the get-go, from the very beginning, open mind, non-judgmental, leave room for newness and new things. At dusk, it was a time of evening just before dark, and the house was empty except for the two of them. As they lay together entwined in a warm embrace, this room, this bed was the universe. She stroked the nape of his neck. He nuzzled her erect nipple first gently with his nose, then licked it, tasted, smelled, and absorbed her body odor. It was a hot and humid August day, and they had been perspiring. Slowly, he caressed her breast as he softly rolled his face over the contours of the other. He pressed his body close against her side and, completely tired, closed his eyes and soon fell into a deep sleep. Ever so slowly, she slipped herself out from under him for fear that she would wake him. She cradled him in her arms and then moved into his crib. Having completed his 6 o'clock feeding, they just experienced another important step toward his sexual development. And I'm wondering where your minds went, where your minds were traveling to as I read that little vignette for you. And I love to start that vignette because of these reasons here. Some people would actually not recognize any sexual overtones in what I just read, because in some parts of the world, breasts aren't sexualized. Breasts don't mean anything except feeding babies. So in some cultures and across time, I would read this very same story for a group of people, and their minds would not go where your minds went. And of course, others, perhaps like yourselves, may be surprised that it isn't sexual in the way that it first seemed to be. So once from the get-go, broaden your minds and be open to new information. So it suggests that the important early beginnings that should be of our sexual development, and reminds us that what we assume to be sexual or erotic do not always remain true for all situations and all cultures. Underlying concept and assumption as we go forward. All right. So here is some new knowledge. We're going to talk about the difference between sexuality and sexual health. We tend to use these words interchangeably, and they actually mean different things. Let's start with sexuality. When we talk about sexuality, we mean a total sensory experience involving sound, taste, smell, touch, and sight. It involves the most important sex organ. What's the most important sex organ? The brain. And it's the brain working in collaboration with the body. In fact, when there is a disconnect between our bodies and our brains, when they're not in alignment in terms of our beliefs or values or even our nervous system, sexual dysfunction steps in. Sexual health, on the other hand, the ability to do what? Enjoy and control our sexual and reproductive life. So if you're enjoying it and not controlling it, you're not sexually healthy. If you're controlling it and not enjoying it, you are also not sexually healthy. Both must coexist for you to be considered to be in sexual health. A little bit deeper into what we mean when we say sexuality, an expression of who we are. How do you express that? What are your thoughts and what are your beliefs? What are your feelings and your emotions when you think about sexuality? How do you express it? And what does it look like in a sexual relationship when you do express your sexual self? How does your body react and respond to stimuli? So that's the biology of the sexual response system. And we see all of that played out in our fantasies, in our attitudes, the way we dance, the music we listen to, the way we dress these bodies, how we walk, how we sing, how we enjoy others' companies, our roles or desires and the things we say, etc., etc. This is sexuality. When we talk about sexual health, which is what we tend to focus on mostly in our part of the world, the ability to enjoy and express one's sexuality, free from risks of sexually transmitted infections, free from unwanted pregnancy. So you're enjoying and controlling, free of these, free from force, free from violence, free from discrimination. So no matter your age, your status, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your cultural background, your religion, no matter what, as a human being, you have the right to access information and support so that you can enjoy and express and experience your sexuality safely. That is sexual health. So do a little quick check on yourself. How are you rating yourself when it comes to your sexual health? This I want you to hold on to. This is key for everybody, regardless of your genitals. This is what consent is, and this is part of sexual health. It is not consent if you make me afraid, ashamed, or feel guilty about saying no. In other words, if someone said yes, but they only said yes because they were shamed, they were bribed, they were manipulated, they were made to feel guilty or afraid or ashamed, that is not considered consent. Word or an acronym for you to remember what consent looks like. FRIES. I think everybody here knows FRIES. So it should be easy for you to remember. When we talk about FRIES and consent, each of those letters stand for a feature or a characteristic of consent. Freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Let's delve a little bit deeper into what we mean by those things. When we say freely given, it means that all partners have the freedom to say yes or no. There's no pressure, there's no force, there's no manipulation. It is freely given. That must be a part of consent. It's reversible. Anyone in the interaction can change their mind at any time and ask to stop, even if you're in the middle of the sex act. This is not for the female partner alone or the male partner alone. It is whoever is involved. If at any time you feel uncomfortable, you're not sure, you're experiencing pain, everyone has that right to stop and say, okay, no, I can't go on, or I don't want to go on. It's reversible. It is informed. You know exactly what you're consenting to every time. You have enough information to make a decision. Yeah, and there's no guesswork. Have enough information to know, okay, this is what we're going to do. And every time you are going to indulge in any kind of connection that is of a sexual nature, consent starts over again. You don't ever assume that consent today is consent forever and ever, amen. Does not work like that. That is not healthy and that is not safe. It is enthusiastic. This is the E in the FRIES. All partners should be excited and engaged in what is happening. And if they're not, you stop immediately. And the S, it is specific. Each act requires consent each time, even if you've done it before. Things change, bodies change, health status change, mental health and emotional health or status changes. So when you give consent or someone gave you consent, they consented to something, not all the things. And it is also, as we said, informed. So in other words, in the middle of action, don't be pulling out no whips and handcuffs for me. We didn't talk about that before. No, we didn't specifically say that was involved. Don't do me that. Don't do anybody that. All right, so that is consent. That is critical, that you understand consent and that you know that FRIES acronym and what each of the letter in FRIES stands for. Sex is more than genital. I'm going to pause here and stop share because I want to get some feedback on what you've heard so far. And when I say feedback, thoughts, feelings or emotions, anything that's happening in your body that you want to share, I'm going to leave the floor open for a few minutes before I continue. Thoughts, feelings, sensations in your body. And if there's nothing, that's completely fine as well. I will continue. But I will pause and see if anyone wants to share or ask anything. Nothing? We all good? All right. I shall continue. If questions do come up, feel free to put them in the chat, and Kyle and whoever else is assisting will make note of them and make sure that I don't miss any questions. So let's continue on our journey. Oops. Let me make sure I pull up the right one. Yes. So way more than genital behavior. And what do I mean by that? All right. When we talk about sex education in our world, like the real world of sex education, not the assumed world that people think it's about, we use these two models to teach about sex. In other words, we'll create lesson plans based on these very broad topics. And we take out of these circles what is age appropriate. So there are things for different ages in each of these circles. So sensuality, intimacy, sexual identity, that's the orientation, that's the hotspot in our part of the world. Sexual and reproductive health, sexual behaviors and practices, or sexualization. And in the center of these circles, you will notice we have power and agency in one and values in the other. There is no proper sex education that is without values clarification. Values guide our behavior and guide our choices and guide how we choose, why we would choose certain partners. And power and agency means it makes no sense to teach people and give them all this information, and then they can't do anything with it to keep themselves and their partners safe. So do they have access to services? Do they have access to healthcare products? Do they have access to professionals who can help them after we've given them this information for how to keep themselves safe and well? We're going to dive a little bit deeper into these circles so you get a sense of what do we actually teach? What are these lesson plans about? What are the subtopics? So the first circle there, sensuality. Lesson plans in there for different age stages, and we just take out what's needed for each age and stage, include things like body image, human sexual response, what's actually happening in your body with certain stimuli and how to understand it, how to manage it. We talk about fantasy, human touch, and something called skin hunger. Skin hunger is critical. Without touch, as babies, you will actually wither away and die, so touch is important. Physical attraction. Right? We teach about skin hunger and how skin hunger changes as we get older for different people, and how you can tell the difference between needing sex and simply wanting to be held and hugged. It's something that is really critical for young people to be able to understand the difference. So there are many lesson plans under there for different ages based on what they need to know because of the developmental stage that they're at. We teach about intimacy, so lesson plans on caring, lesson plans on sharing, and how do you do that? How do you do that well? Lesson plans on knowing the difference between love and lust, emotional risk-taking, being vulnerable. The lesson plans would be on sexual identity, will be about the topics that we don't like to talk about. because for those of us who have a religious background, these topics we think are being taught in ways that force people to accept. You don't have to accept anything, but you do need to understand that these people of different genders and different sexes, and we do have more than male and female sexes in terms of genitals and DNA, have always existed. It's not a new trend. And they deserve to be treated like human beings. They deserve love and care as well. They also deserve to have a good and healthy and safe sex life. And I always tell people, when we do lesson plans and we have a schedule of sex education lessons, I always let parents know upfront so they can choose if they want to keep their children home on the days when they have topics that they're not comfortable with. But it is critical that they understand how the world really has been designed and has always been designed. Sexual health and reproduction, this is what we usually teach in Trinidad and Tobago: how not to get pregnant, how to avoid the STIs, taking care of your sexual and reproductive organs, your practices, using your condoms, your contraceptives, etc., etc. And but there is a lot more than that under sexual health and reproduction, which would include like your feelings and your attitudes about certain sexual practices. And that will be for the older persons in a sex ed class. And that last circle, sexualization, is interesting because it's a mixed bag of positive and negative. When we teach about sexualization, we teach about using sex to have power, control, and influence over somebody. And that could be fun and consensual, like two adults flirting with each other, like seduction. And then it gets a little blurry when we do things like, and I can say this with ladies because we do this often, ladies, using our sexuality to change a situation. So for example, you might commit a traffic violation, police officer stop you, and if it's a male police officer, and you flash some boobs, you show some leg, you get some sweet talk, and you then get the ticket. If it's a man, you ain't getting through with that. But that is a clear example of using your sexuality or your sexual energy to influence the outcome of a situation. And yep, that's lesson plans we teach about that. And of course, it gets more negative in this circle when we talk about sexual harassment, withholding sex, rape, and incest. So this is sex education. Notice out of these 5 circles, 1 circle actually talks about the sexual act, which is sexual health and reproduction. All the other circles have nothing to do with genital behavior. Now, when somebody comes to me as in a clinical setting, like they have challenges with their partner or with how their body is functioning, we call that clinical sexology, as opposed to sex education, which we just spoke about. And this is how I assess somebody who comes into my office here who may be having challenges with their sexual performance. So I assess the mind, the mental aspect of sex. What information do they have? Do they know a lot about how sex works? What are they telling themselves in their mind? What are they thinking about their sexual performance and how are they judging it? Do they have a capacity to imagine good sex, or what's the capacity for fantasy? Do they have any troubling thought patterns? And are there challenges like compulsivity? And that's another word for addiction, where they feel as if their behavior is out of their control. So we assess that. And then we also assess the emotional part of sex. What feelings do you have from the past about your body image, about things you've done? Can you express your emotions well, or do you suppress them? And how do you express your emotions when it comes to your sexuality and how you feel about yourself and your partner? And can you be intimate? Intimacy here is like in to me, see. And so it looks at how can you be very open and vulnerable and honest with a partner and still feel safe and loved and cared for. And then we have body and behavior. This is what most people know about when it comes to sexuality. This is why they usually come to see me. Something is going wrong with what's happening in their body. They may not like their body, and so they can't be comfortable. They don't understand how their own sexual pattern works. They don't have the skills to be a successful lover either by themselves, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, or with a partner, or there may be pain or discomfort or the inability to really experience pleasure. And this is what usually brings people into my office. And of course, I assess the other things that underlie or cause these things to happen. And then I talk about energy. You know, in our culture, we say, oh, my blood doesn't take here, no, my blood doesn't take she, you know. That's kind of an energetic connection we have with each other. And then there's also the energies that our bodies have because we have physical bodies. So I assessed your energy levels and how you can sense energy and what you do with energy in your body and how you could sense somebody's interaction with your own body. And so this is something we also look at when I'm assessing somebody in my office. And we also assess the spiritual aspect of sex. Nothing to do with religion, obviously, because all kinds of people from all walks of life will come to see a sexologist. So when we assess the spiritual aspect of someone's sexuality, we're talking about how do they see themselves, their true self, as being enhanced by their sexual energy. How important is it for their life? Are they able to see themselves closer or feel themselves closer to themselves, closer to their partner, closer to whoever they consider to be divine or God through their sexuality? Do they see it as a gift? Do they see it as an energy that was given that is healing, but is also magical and creative? The subtle ways in which you see your divinity and your sacredness through your sexuality, which is how you got here to begin with. It creates life. And so we assess this and we put together an action plan for helping you heal or overcome whatever challenges you're having in your sex life. So this is the clinical sexology. The first part with the circles, the sex education. Right. Quick pause again. Quick pause again to see if there's any feedback, any thoughts, any sensations in your body. What's happening with folks with what I just shared. And Father Charles, you're also free to comment or ask questions if any have come up for you. But I know it's a lot to take in, and that's why I'm putting it in chunks, give people time to digest and then move on. And we still have time at the end for questions and comments.
All right, no problem. You go ahead.
All right, okay, cool. Anyone else? Any comments, questions, and concerns? Serious? You all understand everything? And everything is cool? Nothing giving you a little tingle of discomfort or that you're not sure about? Okay. I'll wait until the end and see if anything comes up. Let's continue. Right. Now, I always talk about this because in my practice, I find that we have adults here who have no clue about their bodies, especially women. I find women, girls, females are not always very clear about the tools or the equipment that they have for engaging in sexual activity. So a little bit of anatomy and physiology I'm going to share with you now. Right, so when we talk about the tools for sex, the most important sex organ, it controls our sexual responses, it releases sex hormones, it creates sex fantasies, and it stimulates the body. What is the most important sex organ? See if you can guess, I'm going to come back to it after. The largest sexual organ, what can that be? It has nerves that respond to touch, temperature, and texture. Some areas of this organ are very sensitive, like the nipples, the genitals, the backs of your knees, and it can lead to arousal and pleasure. And then there is a body part that both men and women have that could provide sexual pleasure. So let's go back to the first one. What is the most important sex organ? The one that controls our responses, that releases sex hormones, that creates fantasies, that stimulates the body? The brain. The brain is the most important sex organ. Things not happening right up there in terms of what you think and your belief and what you know, very likely you have some level of dysfunction, discomfort, or you are not completely exploring and enjoying the potential of your sexual energy. Largest sex organ. Nerves that respond to touch and temperature and texture, rough, smooth, silky, etc. And some areas of this organ are more sensitive than others. It is the skin. So your skin is actually the largest sex organ. And that body part that both men and women have that may provide sexual pleasure, the breasts. So yes, I'm calling that area in your chest, fellas, that also has nipples, I'm calling it breast. Okay. But these are key and critical tools that are involved in your sexual experiences. All right, let's move on. Female genitals. I like to go through this because once again, a lot of people have never seen this diagram or not familiar with it, right? Front view of the female genitals. If you can see my arrow here, the mons pubis or the mound, this is where the pubic hair usually grows. Please note, no vulvas. And what you're seeing here is a vulva, people. This is not the vagina. We don't see vaginas. Vaginas are the inside. What you see when you take off the underwear, ladies, is called a vulva, V-U-L-V-A. So on the vulva, and this is a perfectly drawn vulva. Vulvas don't look like this. Please do not compare yours to this, ladies. Fellas, do not compare vulvas to this. This is not realistic. It's just here to show the parts so you can learn the parts and their names. So here, oops, is where the hair grows, or pubic hair. And pubic hair has a purpose, people. So don't be shaving all of it off all the time. Mons pubis. Out here, these are the outer lips, also called the labia majora. I say outer lips because it's not always majora, and it's not always bigger than the inside lips. Vulvas come in many varieties, shapes, and shades of color. The inside, and some women don't even have inside lips actually. The inside lips here, sometimes called the labia minora, because sometimes they tend to be thinner and smaller. In some women, they actually are longer and actually curl outwards of the outer area. So these are the inner lips. This area here gets a lot of attention, or has gotten a lot of attention. This is the clitoris. This is actually the head. You only see in the top. It has legs that go back into the body. This has 8,000 to 12,000 nerve endings in this area alone. That's more than men have in their penis and balls put together. 8,000 to 12,000 nerve endings inside here. You pull back the hood and you see the head of the clitoris, 8,000 to 12,000 nerve endings. Below the clitoris is a urethral opening. This is where the urine passes out. This is where you pee. And then below is the vagina. And of course, for the back door where you poop, this is the anus. So there are 3 entrances in this part of the body, ladies. The urethra for urine, the vagina for menstrual blood, for inserting objects for sexual pleasure, including a penis, passage of baby passes out, and the back where you have your waste food or your poop that comes out. Vulva, this is a vulva. Side view. So follow my arrow again. I hope you can see it. This here, the first hole, the first entrance in the body, urethra, goes up into the bladder. Now you see where the bladder is, just below the uterus or the womb. This is why if there's a baby growing in here and the womb gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it stretches and pushes down on the bladder, and the bladder has less space, and so pregnant women have to go to the bathroom often. This is why. See where it is? This space here going up into the womb or the uterus, this is the vagina here. So the passageway is actually the vagina, and this is actually muscle. So there are muscles in the vagina. There's a dead end here. Like you can't push things up in there and it'll get lost in the body. And you can squeeze your muscles and it will always come out, ladies. That's a technique. That's a whole workshop by itself. But yes. Oh, where's my arrow? My arrow, come back, arrow. Right, here we go. And of course, the back door, the anus, which is the end of our digestive system. Things can go up in here and get lost because this tube goes all the way back up to our stomach, to our intestines, and back up to our throat. Do not push things up the back here, please. Okay, not safe. So this is the side view. And of course, we have an ovary here, which releases the egg, which goes down the fallopian tube and enters into the uterus for implantation if there is pregnancy. So this is the female reproductive system. I'm going to touch a little bit on the guys. Gentlemen, so this is you. And for the guys, see where the bladder is? There's no room to squish it down, but below here, the prostate, if the prostate is swollen, notice it will block this tube here, which is the urethra or urine pass, which is why it may be painful or difficult to pass urine if you have prostate issues. See where it is? This is why, right? It's right next to the bladder as well. The gentleman, the urine and the semen comes out through the same passage. In here, the testes where sperm made, and the prostate produces a fluid that mixes with the sperm to give you your semen. So this is the guys, right? A little bit, well, a lot simpler than what's inside the female body. Now, this is a very interesting part of how I teach sex education. So back in the day, long before the pandemic, when I would meet with folks, we would have a group where we would talk about the challenges of living your best sex life. And I would share certain statements and I would put these signs around the room: agree, disagree, not sure. And people would go and stand in by those signs to show their decisions around a particular statement. So we're not moving around today, but I am going to share with you the statements that I use so we can begin to think about and in your mind, and maybe spend some time discussing, if you wish, the challenges those statements present to you and what's happening in your body when I make those statements, what's going through your mind. When I say what's happening in your body, heart rates, sensations like funny feeling in your stomach, breathing increases, you get a headache, all those are sensations. And then the emotions, how you feel, sad, angry, confused. So I want you to note what's happening with you in terms of your sensations in the body, your emotions, and your thoughts, what's going through your mind as I share these statements with you. So values clarification. First one, human sexuality education should start at primary school. And of course, it is agree, disagree, or not sure. That's one. Think about that. How do you feel about that? If you have questions or comments that you want to make, save them and put them in the chat. We can talk about them later. It is emotionally harmful to have sexual intercourse without love. Agree, disagree, not sure. Let that sink in. What are your thoughts? What's happening in your body? And what are your emotions that are coming up with this? Homosexuality is normal and natural. Agree, disagree, not sure. What are your thoughts? What's happening in your body? And what are your feelings? What are your emotions that are coming up with that statement? Take note of it if you want to put anything in the chat. If not, you can also send me a private note so nobody else knows who's asking, and they'll know what was asked, but they wouldn't know who's asking. So feel free to send me a private chat, and I could share it with everybody in terms of the comment or the question, and they wouldn't know who it came from. I'm going to let these stay here for a while. Formulate your thoughts and your feelings, and we can have a discussion if you wish. Masturbation, also known as solo pleasure or self-pleasure. I prefer solo pleasure. Masturbation is a wonderful practice. There's nothing wrong with it. Agree, disagree, not sure. Once again, check in with yourself. What are your thoughts? What's happening in your body? What are your emotions that are coming up? When it comes to sex, men are visually turned on, while women need meaning, romance, and emotions. So men see and they're ready to go. Women don't see and are ready to go. They have to have meaning and romance, and the emotions must be involved. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or are you not sure? I'm going to let that sink in, and we will talk about that in a little while if it comes up. Sexuality and spirituality, or sex and religion, don't mix. They are mutually exclusive. Meaning, if you're into spirituality, you can't be into sex too. You can't like sex. And if you like sex and you're into sexuality, you can't be spiritual. That'll work. Do you believe that? They don't mix. Agree, disagree, not sure. What are your thoughts? What's happening in your body? And what are the emotions and feelings that are coming up for you? Open relationships or open marriages are fine as long as the persons involved know and they agree and they give consent. Agree, disagree, not sure. What are your thoughts? What are your body sensations that are coming up? Is there a gut reaction? And what are the emotions that are coming up for you with that statement? And I believe this is the last one. I'm going to pause again. Sexually explicit content like porn should be completely banned or made illegal. Agree? Disagree? Not sure. Thoughts, feelings, body sensations. What's happening when you read that statement? Women, nobody else, women should have the final say on pregnancy and abortion. Thoughts, emotions or feelings, body sensations. What's happening with you? All right, so I'm going to stop share. And I'm going to give people time to think about those statements and perhaps share what their feelings are about some of those statements or what their thoughts are. Okay, so I'm seeing something in the chat that I'm going to share. So if I can track all of it. Right, for the first slide of, okay, agree, not sure, agree. Okay, I'm not sure what this person is trying to say, like I'm not sure which slide is which statement. So I'll have to go back to the slides and let you know. So give me a while, that person is responding here. I am not sure, this is about sex education. Sex education, I'm not sure sex education can begin at primary school if the information is age appropriate and the presenter is aware of the audience. However, we have different belief systems and some people may consider it taboo. Yes, some people consider it taboo. And just like any other subject area, biology, English language, mathematics, social studies, etc., just as each of those subjects have to understand the brain development of the child, the social development of the child, and what the child needs to know in maths for that age, what they need to know in social studies, what they need to know in science. Sex educators are the same thing. We don't just decide, hey, I feel they should know this because they reach 5. That's not how it works. We say at 5 years old, this is what's happening in the brain, this is what's happening in the body, and this is what this 5-year-old needs in order to keep themselves sexually healthy and sexually safe. It's not a random, we just pull from the air anything we want because we feel. And I don't know if people think that's how sex educators come up with lesson plans. And why would you think that? Like, why would it be different to any other subject area? It isn't. We understand brain development, body development, social development, and we know, okay, at age 7, this is what's happening with children, and this is what they need to know. This is what they need to know in maths, in English, in social studies, in science, and in sexuality. And particularly in sexuality, because the less they know, the less they can protect themselves from predators. The less they know, the more mistakes they make as they grow older and find themselves in problems and end up in my office or end up with really bad relationships and really bad marriages. and we get the statistics. So I know. Someone else says, I think it should be introduced because some children are exposed to a lot more than we think they are. This way we can persuade them into a more positive direction. Yes, and it should be done not just because children are exposed, because children have a right to know. They have a right to know what's happening with their bodies, how to take care of their bodies, and how to protect themselves. They have a right to know what's going on in the world so they know how to navigate in the world safely. And they're asking questions. Their brains are working and thinking and seeing and feeling, and their bodies are feeling. And if we give them nothing to help them understand what's happening with them, they're going to make assumptions or find the information elsewhere. And that is very, very unfair. It is unsafe. And it's literally disrespectful to treat young people like that, because we assume that they're not in a position, that they're not capable of using the information we give them well. And that is simply not true, because it's designed for their age, for the age and stage that they're in. All right, so I'm going to quickly go to this slide to respond to someone sharing what they thought. Agree, disagree, or not sure. Let me see if I can find that. Right, sex education since out of primary school, so the person is agreeing with that. It is emotionally harmful to have sexual intercourse without love. I think there was a disagree. And homosexuality is normal and natural. Let me see what was the response to that. Hold on. Not sure, right? So the person is not sure about whether homosexuality is normal and natural. So there is nothing in all the ages that we've been around on this earth that shows anything wrong with people who are not straight. There's nothing wrong with them. Like there's nothing has gone wrong, nothing is malfunctioning. And we get a little bit into that in some other slides, not a whole lot. We're just going to be talking about what we know around the world and how different people view people who are not straight. But a lot of people also think that same-sex interactions doesn't happen in nature with animals, and that's absolutely not true. So it's natural that way because it happens in nature with animals as well. Somebody here is agreeing with homosexuality being normal. It's just part of the variety. If you look at nature, nature is extremely diverse, has extremely strange and different varieties of things. And if we are part of nature, then we're also going to find that variety within human beings, all kinds of variety, from skin color to hair texture, to even our genitals. There's some people who are intersex, meaning they don't have an obvious vulva and they don't have an obvious penis and testicles. They have something that's in between or a mix of the two. There are even people who have male genitals outside, but they have ovaries inside. That actually exists. There are people who look female, but they have male DNA. So if you check their blood and you test their cells, you will see the DNA says XY. Same thing with male bodies, but having female DNA. There's lots and lots and lots and lots. Oh, it's the same person who made the comment. Okay, thanks for the correction. But yes, there is a lot of variety in the natural world when it comes to sexuality and to being intersex and to having a variety beyond male and female. There is more, and there's always been more than male and female. Plants, animals, people. That's just a fact. That's just what it is. All right. So I'm going to continue to make sure we have time for questions and comments. Even though you guys are really quiet, I guess people are being shy. Or maybe they're still in shock with what's being shared, or it's very uncomfortable. But I'm not going to rush it still, so that people have time to still share if they wish. And another question here, direct message. Would females have male DNA able to have children? I believe so, once the reproductive organs are functioning. So it depends on whether the reproductive organs they have are normal and functioning. So don't quote me on that. I don't remember, because some combinations of genes means that the persons are unable to have children. So for example, with somebody who's externally male. So they have the penis or they have the testicles, but inside, and sometimes they don't know until like they have an accident or an operation. Doctors have to go in and operate. They're like, oh, there's an ovary or ovaries in here. What's going on? Sometimes that happens. In that case, of course, there isn't a birth passage. There isn't a vagina, but there are these female parts, these female organs inside of the person's pelvic area. So someone like that will not be able to have children. What I'm not sure is whether the sperm that they produce is viable sperm. So whether they can impregnate someone. I don't remember the differences. But for some, yes, for some maybe. You're actually correct. For some maybe. It depends on their particular variety, right? Another comment. Sexuality, spirituality, or sex and religion being mutually exclusive. What does science say? Science, well, that's an interesting one because you're equating here science with spirituality. And I do believe that, but people don't. So science is saying that people are sharing and talking about spiritual experiences that happen to them during the act of intercourse or during the act of sex. In fact, there was a long-term study done that involved thousands of people. Usually studies involve like, a few hundred people or a small sample group. This study was done about the interaction or the intersection of sex and spirituality over a few years with thousands of people, men and women. And the data has shown that for people, for some people in particular, there's no separation between the two. In fact, there are people who didn't believe in a God or in a divine being until they had a spiritual experience during sex. And that may be a little uncomfortable for people because, usually we say that you need to be a part of that religion and seek that spirituality first and everything will be added onto you after that. For some people, they weren't looking for God, they were simply looking for good, healthy sexual experiences. And during that good, healthy sexual experience, they found God or they met God. That's how they describe it. They had out-of-body experiences. They felt a deep connection with themselves and with the universe, and they felt everything was one and connected. And that changed their lives. And they became spiritual after that, not before. And that was featured very, very prominently in that long-term studies. Someone is saying same part of the brain is associated with both. I have read, yes. There are parts of the brain in the same area. Of course, you can still go deeper into that area and find, differences or specialities within the cells in the brain. But the same part of the brain that responds to spirituality may also respond to sexuality and sexual experiences. In some cultures, the words aren't even separate. In some cultures, there isn't a word for spirituality because everything is spiritual. You don't have to have a word for it. That's just is. Life is spirit, and what we do is a manifestation of spirituality. So in some cultures, there's not a word for spirituality, so no word for religion. They don't have a word for that can be translated into English because they don't have that. That's not how they see life. Life is simply spiritual. And once you engage in sex, you are engaged in something that's sacred and spiritual, so they don't separate it. The way the Western world and those of us who've been colonized have ended up separating it. They just don't. So when we talk about that in other cultures, like, what? How are they different? If sex is happening, spirituality is happening. So you treat sex very delicately because spirit is involved. And that's how some cultures and some people see it. Let's see, are there any more questions or comments? Children are being bombarded by negative sexual information, yes. So we as adults need to give them the correct information at age appropriate. Correct, and that's a responsible thing to do as parents and guardians of children. Like if you are not giving your children the tools, then you are doing them a huge disservice. That is unfair. That is really, really, really unfair. Yes, saying can protect them from being hurt. Correct. Right, someone disagreed to open marriages, disagree to the sex and religion comment, right, disagree to open marriages. And that is a personal choice. I know of people who have open marriages and they prefer that as opposed to getting horn or somebody horning. So they have their rules, they have their boundaries, they keep their unit, the main couple, strong and stable, and they have their boundaries and their rules around that allowance for their partners to have sexual experiences outside of their main marriage. So it definitely isn't for everybody, but I know of couples in which it works well for them. They're wonderfully for them. And I've had couples come to me to help them figure out how to do it. And of course, doing that means that they have to get rid of certain beliefs and thoughts about what marriage is supposed to be or look like for them. Issues with jealousy, issues with safety, STIs, issues with pregnancy, issues with children, and how are you navigating all those boundaries and concerns when it comes to having open relationships. So there's lots to learn when it comes to managing situations and relationships like that, but it's definitely not for everybody. Just as I think marriage is not for everybody, or parenting is not for everybody. That's my bias. I'm letting it open. That is not a sex education thing that I force on people. It is simply my bias, making that clear. Everybody is free to understand what their values are and how do those values keep them safe and keep them healthy and protected. So I'm going to go back to the presentation so that I don't go over time. If no more questions or comments, I'm going to share my screen again. Right, so we're into gender. We're going to do a little bit about gender. Just give me a minute. My laptop is getting low on power. Let me just plug it in. Hey guys, apologies. Let me just plug it in. Right, so a bit about gender. This is a very interesting word. Not every culture has this word because it's a concept, it's a Western concept. It came from the Western world, AKA the white people, the Europeans. It's certainly not something that you find right across the board in all cultures. So let's talk about gender a little bit. What do we mean when we say gender? All right, I'm on computer, don't stick with me now. Hold on, folks. Apologies. Let me figure out what's happening with that presentation. Share screen. What about gender? There we go. Finally. All right, let me go back. Right, so gender. Okay, gender. Gender, a mostly Western concept. It refers to the socially constructed characteristics of women and men. So in other words, certain societies or groups decide, okay, if you're a woman, this is how you dress, this is what you wear, this is what you can do, this is the jobs you can have, this is where you can go. Men, so people want you to have a penis and you're considered to be a man. This is where you can go. This is what you can do. This is how you should dress. This is how you should talk. This is the job that you should have. That's what gender is. Given rules or roles for people based on what genitals they have. That's gender. And of course, that's going to be different from society to society, and it can change, and it has changed over time. So could you For those of us who are old enough here to remember a time when women were not allowed to be fire officers. I actually remember when they brought in the first batch of female fire officers. So that's an example of a gender rule that changed over time. There's a time when women weren't allowed to be soldiers. They weren't allowed to fight in war. They weren't allowed to be police officers. They weren't allowed to be doctors because women don't do certain things. There's also a time when you couldn't dress a particular kind of way because based on your genitals, then this is how you're supposed to dress. This is how you comb your hair. This is where you're allowed to go, and this is what you're supposed to do in the home. That's just an explanation of gender, basically. And then there is gender identity. This is where things get a little ticklish. This is your psychological sense of self, who you, in your head, in your experience of the world, know yourself to be, and whether that feeling that you have lines up or matches what your society says exists. So what you understand to be the options for gender. This is where the bacchanal does start in our part of the world, okay? Because we who've inherited or we've had forced on us these gender roles where you can only have two. It's male or female, man or woman. And so people who come into the world whose brains, emotions, their soul is designed differently. It's like, but I don't fit into any of these. I can't. It's just not working for me. And so we have a whole group of people who are ostracized, demonized, bullied, called all kinds of names, because we say there's only two and you're supposed to fit in one of each. That has never been the case. And our ancestors, when I say our, I mean our Caribbean people's ancestors. So our ancestors from West Africa, from Southeast Asia, from India, and our local indigenous people, they always had more than one gender. They always had more than one sex. People could be more than two things. And so in those societies, you didn't have that problem because they recognized that people had a wide variety, just as nature has a wide variety. Now, you're not going to be able to read everything on this. You're not supposed to. You're not meant to. But I wanted you to get a sense of how the Western world has organized gender in a way that's easy for us to understand. And so when we talk about gender, the brain, your mind, is where your identity is. Who do you know that you are? How are you experiencing life? Is your brain oriented to male or female, in between, or neither one? Are you neutral? So that's your identity, who you are, your purpose, and what you feel your purpose in life is. And then there's the heart, your attraction, the emotions. Who are you attracted to? Who do you feel drawn to? Who do you want to go to bed with? Who do you want to have sex with? That's the attraction part of your gender. And then there's the what's happening between your legs, the biology. What's the equipment you have down there? And you notice that you have the arrow for male, the cross for female, and then you have one as a combination of two. That's because those genitals do exist, where it's neither male nor female, or it's both. And of course, the outside is how you express your gender. What you're wearing, do you like bright colors? Do you like dresses or pants or skirts? Do you like to mix and match masculine and feminine fashion? And that's masculine and feminine still going to depend on what your culture says is masculine or feminine. So that expression will look different across different cultures and different time. So what's happening in your brain, what's happening in your heart, what's happening between your legs and your biology, and what's happening on the outside in terms of how you dress yourself, how you're expressing your sexuality and your gender. So this is the gender-bread person. This is how they break it down. A little bit about the ancient ways, things that we no longer have access to, that haven't been taught to us, that were always part of many civilizations before colonization, before indentureship, and before slavery. So sexuality and our ancestors. This is your heritage. You can choose to accept it or let it go. Personal choice, but this is what it is. And I wanted to share this so people understand that what's happening in societies now, especially like ours that are ex-slave societies and ex-indentureship societies, people think, oh my gosh, we are following what Americans doing with all this LGBTQ thing. And in fact, that is not true. They are now catching up to what our ancestors always knew and always had room for. And they're doing it very badly. That's my bias. They're doing it very badly in terms of their approach. But I want to share with you what is also part of our legacy in terms of how our ancestors, in their wisdom, understood human sexuality. So first of all, they had no gender that was more equal than the other or higher up or superior. So our Caribbean First Peoples, so the Locono, the Kalina people used to be called Caribs and Arawaks. That's not what they call themselves. That's a name the white folks gave them. So I'll call them by the names that I know or I'm familiar with. So the Kalina and Locono people, and there are other peoples, but our first peoples, the native Caribbean peoples, as well as the Native American people, also called Native Indians, but of course they weren't Indian. But so the Native Americans, people from Asia, and people from across the continent in Africa before colonization, they had matriarchal societies. So it meant that the women, you would track your lineage through the mothers. You would know, you would think about, okay, who was your mother? Who was your mother before your mother? Who was your mother's mother, et cetera, et cetera. And so the tribe or the group you belong to depended on the line of the women because women were the ones giving birth. And the father could be anybody, but you're sure who the mother is. So it made sense to track through mothers, through those who gave birth. Those societies also had more than two genders. There was a third gender in some cases, and sometimes there were fourth and fifth. If you do some research into your own Christian culture and what you inherited, the Jewish people also had 6 different names for 6 different genders and different kinds of people. So that's some research you guys can do, something that you're interested in. But Jewish culture didn't have a binary either. They saw homosexuality positively. So it wasn't a negative thing, it wasn't demonized. And human beings were equal regardless of their genitals. And like I said before, they didn't have a word for gender. The IFA system, some of us may know a local variety of this, the Orisha system, Orisha followers. They come from the original IFA system of Nigeria. In that culture, they believe and they know that a body can have a combination of masculine and feminine energies. They're looking at what's between your legs. What between your legs is not what gives you your power. What gives you your power are your abilities, your status, and the skills that you had. It didn't matter whether you were male, female, a mix of the two, what happened between your legs. It was always about your ability and your purpose. So this is part of our heritage. This is what our ancestors understood. The Dagara people of Burkina Faso in West Africa, these people fascinate me. They don't have a word for gay or lesbian. Like that doesn't exist in their language. They do recognize people who are not straight or not heterosexual, but they don't call them gay or lesbian. They call them gatekeepers. This is how they saw gatekeepers. For them, people who were not heterosexual were mediators. They were like, so your body has masculine and feminine. So that means in their minds that you are here to create balance between the genders and between the sexes. So you mediate. So often those who were gatekeepers were called in to be counselors and to be mediators between male and female, between husband and wife. Gatekeepers, as they were called, they believed in this culture, they have a strong spiritual connection because their bodies are different. It didn't look quote unquote normal. Gatekeepers have access to non-human beings, the spirit world. They are able to direct their sexual energy to the spirituality and not to another human being if they choose to. They saw gatekeepers as the persons who kept the sword of truth and integrity. They kept the society balanced and in harmony. And they believed gatekeepers had bodies that vibrated differently and in a special way. So they weren't demonized. They had a special role. So if you were born into a society like this, you weren't discriminated against, you weren't tossed aside, you weren't bullied. You were seen as somebody who has a special purpose because your body is different from the bodies that would usually come together to create life or to have children. this is also part of our heritage. The Daguerres is also very interesting when I was reading about them and studying them. They have these rituals every year for men to nurture their feminine energy and for women to nurture their masculine energy. So the men would go off in a camp for, in a retreat for a few days, and they would dress like women, they would change their voices like women, they would move like women, they would cry, they would do the things that are usually associated with women. And the women would do the same thing. They go off in their camp and their retreat for a few days, and some of them would actually put on the artificial beards and the mustache, and they would deepen their voice and they'd speak like men and do the things that men do. They would go hunting so they could understand each other's role and the challenges that each of the sexes or genders experienced. And then they come back from their rituals having a greater respect and understanding for the other sex or the other gender. And this is one way in which they mediated the challenges between men and women. Really, really beautiful ritual that they are engaged in. In India, so we have spoken about Africa, we've spoken about the local people. For our East Indian ancestors of this part of the world, for them, gender, homosexuality, transgenderism was treated as fluid. You weren't stuck as one thing all the time, and you didn't have to be if you weren't straight. They didn't have any shame, and coming out of their Hindu myths, the stories of their gods would also change sexual partners, they would change their own sex, so it wasn't just one sex all the time. So from that background, nothing was demonized or seen as evil or wrong or bad. It was just a variety of life. And of course, they had different roles. And even outside of Hinduism, in India itself, even in the most conservative regions, sexuality and same-sex relations were common. And they were not only accepted, but they were embraced as just part of the variety of human beings' relationships. And I love this quote from this gentleman here. When India decided to get rid of the law that was criminalizing homosexuality, etc. So Shamir Sani said, from gay Sufi lovers, or Sufis, by the way, Sufis are the mystical aspect of Islam, right? So from gay Sufi lovers to Hindu transgender women, India's sexual fluidity was always a dirty, barbaric concept to its Western invaders. And it is crucial for the LGBTQ community here in the West to understand this. This isn't India becoming Westernized. It is India decolonizing. So we're gonna look at a film. Now, I always tell people, it's a warning. The film is not very loud. The audio is poor, so I'm going to pause and maybe translate some of the things you may not be hearing. If you have headphones, please get your headphones. It may be easier for you to hear what's happening in the film. But at parts of the film, there are subtitles where you can read what is being said. All right? So look out for the subtitles. So we're going to look at gender in another culture. This is the Wodabe culture in, I think it's Central Africa. They are nomadic culture. And let's take a look at what gender and sex looks like in their space. So the narrator is saying wearing makeup is part of the man's ethnic identity in this tribe, and it is also worn to attract women. So in this culture, the makeup that you see here is not worn by women. Makeup is for men. So every year there's a Garawal festival where men dress up to take part in a beauty contest. Takes place at the end of the rainy season. And in this beauty contest, the women are the ones who are judging the men on their beauty. Or you can find this on YouTube, by the way, so you can hear it for yourself and listen to it properly if you're curious and interested in following up.
The isolated location and date are kept secret.
Right, so this is just showing the life of this group. They are nomadic, they move across, they're always looking for fresh pasture or fresh water. And this is the group on their way to the Garawell festival where the men would be in the beauty pageant, and they're going to focus on a particular family here.
The cow is provided with milk, which is then traded for milk to make porridge, which is more stable.
Right. So at the Garawell Festival, people have an opportunity to meet new wives or new husbands. And they are not tied to the current wife that they have, so they can add new wives. The wives can also give up the husbands and get new husbands. And everybody's expected to participate. You don't have to, but there's no judgment around this. This is part of what the festival allows people to do. And as you notice, the gentleman here was saying that they all wear dresses and makeup, that is the men. So I'm not sure they're translating the word for dresses correctly, but it clearly it's not pants and shirts, right? There are special gowns that are dressed like that the gentlemen wear. And so it's interesting that in this culture, if they say, behave like a man, act like a man, acting like a man, behaving like a man, in this culture means you need to have your makeup properly done and your dress must be looking good. All right, let's continue.
But they won't be going alone. Their wives are also looking forward to
Right, so just because I'm sure you guys may not be hearing this properly. So in this couple here, they're also preparing not just for the Garawell Festival, but they're also preparing to bring a third person into their relationship, into their marriage. The gentleman is taking on a new wife, and in the desert where they're traveling and the conditions under which they're living means the three of them are in the same tent, sharing the same space for however long they stay together. So that's also an interesting arrangement. And I suppose you can consider this quote unquote open marriage, but the decision to take on another wife or to leave and take another husband is something that they would agree on, something that they talk about. And the wives actually prefer that the men marry rather than have girlfriends and go off and have one night stands. So they prefer more stable interactions in this culture. What's interesting about this culture is that they are Islamic, so they are Muslims. And the women have just as much freedom as the men do. Let's continue. With
no walls between them in the desert, the three will share their lives together.
All right, so I'm going to pause here for some thoughts. What are you thinking? Your attitudes. Tell me about the emotions that are coming up for you, and tell me about the sensations that's happening in your body with those last slides. All right, so let me see. I have a few things in the chat. Let me see if I can keep track of them. Right, yin and yang from Chinese teachings. Let's see if I can scroll down. Also has a similar female duality teaching as you mentioned in Yoruba teachings. Yeah, just note, I'm not familiar with how the Chinese view it, but I know in Yoruba, it's masculine, feminine, not so much male, female. And so a female could have masculine energies or ways of being. And even that translation is not a smooth translation into English. And so anybody can have a mix, like a ratio of energies in their bodies. Jujitsu Matsumoto, I'm sure I did not pronounce that right. India has a lot of gender fluidity. Thanks for sharing. Right, Sandra Belfield via YouTube. I agree that sexuality should be taught in primary schools to educate children about their bodies and information to which they may be exposed. Thanks for sharing, Sandra. Thank you, very informative. You're welcome. Right. Someone asked me, what advice would you give to a parent who wants to educate a child about human sexuality? How should a parent approach the topic? So it's not one talker. It's a series of talks that change as your child gets older to address their development. So it's a series of conversations that start from the time that they are toddlers, when you teach them the correct body parts, when you're teaching them about consent, about privacy, about touching themselves, and for every stage as they grow, you have a new conversation, you teach them new things. So parents first need to understand sexuality. They need to get comfortable with it. And there are also a number of free programs and training online for parents that they can look at. I'll remember at the end to put them in the chat for people who want to access them. So that they can teach their child for every stage as they grow. It's not a one talk. It's not the talk you do when they get to a teenager and you think they might be active. It's not the talk you do when you catch them watching porn. That's not how it works. It's a series of conversations that start from toddlerhood, from babyhood, and conversations continue and they get more complex and they change as the child grows. So it's throughout the lifespan, right? So approach a topic in a way that makes your child know that they could come to you about anything, that you're comfortable with it, that nothing is going to upset you. But you need to be prepared for that. So you need to make sure you go through all the shock of what could happen, to educate yourself, and then find a quiet time with your child, or a time when you're both relaxed and you don't feel tense when you begin the conversations. You could ask them, what do they know? Because you need to know what they know first, because you might need to help them unlearn or undo some misinformation. Right, on the YouTube, the Woodabe tribe, just search WOODABE. The correct spelling should come up if I spelled it incorrectly. Or look for the Garawal Festival, GEREWOL, and I'll put that information in the chat towards the end. Another message here, the peacock is a perfect example of nature displaying that males are to be flamboyant. Yes, In fact, in most of the species in nature, the males are the ones who need to convince the females that I am worthy. I'm worthy of your time. I'm worthy of your sex. I'm worthy of your body. I'm worthy of parenting the next generation. Because the females have to think about the next generation that they're bringing forth into the world. So they need to choose a proper partner. So the partner needs to show that, hey, I'm the person that would be a good fit for you to raise children. Also, females in nature, among animals, can tell whether a male has defective genetics or is ill or sick, and they would not mate with those males because they can tell. And sometimes they can tell through a sense of smell, or perhaps through deficiencies in how they're dancing and moving and displaying themselves. Right, you're welcome. Somebody said thank you for the response. So let's continue because it's 7:44 and I'm almost done, and I want to give you guys time, if you wish, even though you've been very quiet, to still, ask questions and say. So sexual decision-making, critical, right? How do we make decisions about sex, your behavior and choices? Typical scenario here. Young people in a party expressing their sexuality through their dress, through their dance. And the miscommunication here, the assumption is because this is usually the scenario, I'm sure it could be other way around, though not likely. She dressed a particular way, danced a particular way, and so the men try to have all these assumptions in their minds about what she's asking for, what she's looking for because of how she dressed. And she like, dude, this is all about me and nothing to do with you. I'm just enjoying myself and enjoying my own sexuality within my body. All right, a bit on porn. It's like any other movie, i.e. it's fiction. It's fiction. They act, they stop, they take pauses, they take some lube and they lube up. They have to learn how to deal with the heat, and the directors and the cameras all up in the face and all up in the private business. It's an act. It is not real. It doesn't show critical aspects of sexual health. Like, you ain't see nobody talking about consent. They ain't talking about protection and STIs and, preventing pregnancy. In real life, that is madness. You do not do that. That is damaging and hurtful to your sexual health. Once again, it's a movie, and like a movie, it's fiction. Does not represent real life or what should happen in real life to keep you healthy and safe. Unrealistic and unhealthy roles of men and women. Yeah, nobody dick this be hard for that long, right through, under hot lights and cameras all up in your business. Yeah, no. Erection happens, they may lose it, they come off camera, they pause. That 15-minute porn that you look at probably took 3 hours to film. Yeah, and dude had to go and find a way to make sure that he's maintaining his erection. Same thing with the chick. Nobody is that lubricated and wet for all that time with all them kind of movements. No, fiction. They make it up. All right? Keep that in mind when you're looking at porn. For the adults and parents who are looking on and sharing this space for the youth, please take note of these websites. If you can do a screenshot or you can take a photo with your camera, these are excellent. And for the person who asked me about parenting and sex education, these are excellent resources to find free information and free training, like an email course on sexuality and sex education. In terms of parents, the conversation with young people and young people themselves wanting to live and understand more. Father Charles, I can send these resources to you later so you can share them for people if they wish. Just let me know if it's something that you're interested in, right? But if you have your phone or if you can do a screenshot with your camera, with your laptop or whatever, feel free to do so and take a picture of the slide to get those resources at the bottom. Challenge and choice. You can abstain from sexual activity until you feel a sense of empowerment and self-awareness. Be aware of who you are, your values. What do you want for yourself? And because young people change within that time, it is never a good idea to think that you should stick to one kind of person or one kind of group. Because you're growing, you're going to change. Nothing is going to be permanent and the same in your life as you're developing. But you also need to have enough knowledge and a sense of self-discipline to be making choices when it comes to sex and sexuality. People can choose to express their sexuality by giving each other sexual pleasure without sexual intercourse. That is a thing, it can be taught. And please, people, please note, abstinence is a skill. In sex education, we teach abstinence. We teach how to be abstinent. It's not a talent that you're just born with. There may be some people who can do it very well, but are they doing it in a healthy way that will not interfere with their sex life when they eventually find a partner? Abstinence is a skill. You can teach abstinence, you can teach refusal skills, and you can teach people how to manage their sexuality. And that is part of sex education. Because as adults who are teaching young people, we know that because the body is still developing, it is not the best thing to have those young developing bodies exposed to other bodies, because they are more susceptible to infection. They're more susceptible to things going wrong because their bodies are still tender. They're not fully grown, fully developed adults. And so sex educators are interested in helping young people stay abstinent for as long as possible, until their bodies are fully developed and their immune systems are fully developed, until their emotional well-being is fully developed, and until their brains are fully developed, so that the decision-making process is easier and better. And we also know that will not happen for everybody. And we know that because it will not happen for everybody, everybody must have the skill to protect themselves and their partners, and to understand their developing bodies and how to deal with sexual energy when it comes up in their system. What are the ways to deal with that? That is how we help. We don't just talk and tell them what to do. We teach, we give skills. There are ways to do that through various exercises, through various lesson plans, through the activities we do in a session on sex ed. Masturbation. Various religious people have issues with masturbation and solo pleasure, but it is a way out, quote unquote, a way out of intercourse. It is also a wonderful way to learn the body and how the body works and what you like. So you can tell a partner or explain to a partner what you like and what you want and what's safe for you. So solo pleasure in the same space where you're viewing each other or you're on a webcam, that is safe. No body fluids are exchanged. That is an option for those who are comfortable with that. Parents may be going crazy with that thought, but once again, parents need to understand sexual development, what's happening, and you can give young people different choices to keep themselves safe, and also to make sure they're not hurting anyone else. Arm yourself with information. STI prevention, types of condoms, morning after pill. Quick note here on the morning after pill. And once again, this is information you just need to know. Whether you use it as a young person or as an adult, you need to know. Morning after pill does not give abortions. That's not how it works. It prevents the egg from coming out of the ovary. So it says to the body, hey, egg, don't come out because there's sperm around. And if you come out, you will meet the sperm and get fertilized and pregnancy will happen. Thing is, to use a morning pill properly, morning after pill properly, you have to know how your body works. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know or understand when ovulation is happening, when the egg is coming out of the ovary, then you can take the morning after pill after the egg don't come out and it will not work. So you need to know your body deeply and understand how your body works. And you can't just be taking these pills anyhow, anytime, as often as you want as birth control. It is going to cause hormonal imbalance, which will have problems down the road. Connect your brain to your body. Understand what's your triggers, what puts you into the path of temptation. What is your escape plan? What is your avoidance plan if your aim is to be abstinent, if your aim is to have abstinence for as long as possible, until you are fully ready and prepared for all the consequences of sex? Possible STIs, possible pregnancy, emotional upheaval, emotional risk-taking, being vulnerable, managing relationships and arguments. Yeah? Understand when arousal is happening. Connect your brain to your body. Check in and have deliberately slow down so you're making choices about what's triggering you, how to avoid temptations, and what to do if you find yourself in a sticky situation. All of this is part of what we teach in an abstinence plan for young people, and even for adults. There's some adults who are interested in managing their sex lives like that and being abstinent. talking to your partner? Are you able to talk very openly and honestly and comfortably about sex? Can you communicate your needs and wants? Do you know your needs and wants? And how do you get to know your needs and wants? You need to have somebody who is a trained expert help you figure out how to explore that and know that and understand that. Boundaries and trust are critical as well. Consent, and we spoke about consent. I'm not going to go through this again. Being sober. Never make decisions about sexuality when your judgment is impaired because of alcohol or drugs, or even besides being sober, if you're in a really, really bad mood. Never make decisions when you're in a bad mood. Explore. Ask questions about yourself. Read. Get information. Is this lust or love? How are you telling the difference between the two? Desire. Why are you choosing to engage in sex with this person or sexual activity if it's not intercourse? What are the risks? Can you manage anything that happens that you didn't plan for? And get creative. Think beyond penetrative sex. There are other ways to enjoy your erotic and sexual energy that does not involve penis in vagina, that does not involve intercourse. There are other ways to be sexually intimate. And that brings me to the end of my presentation for this evening. I'm going to stop share. And we have 5 minutes for questions. And I know people may have more comments that they may want to make. So Father Charles, I can come on quickly again next week or whenever people have time for half an hour if people want to just talk and ask questions. But yes, we've come to the end of the presentation, and I'm going to just go through the chat and see if there's anything else inside here. Really appreciated the multicultural perspectives which we need to be aware of. Might we get a little bit of the theological side as well if time permits? Right. So time does not permit, but we do have, and when you say theological side, we're talking about, I'm assuming you're talking about Christian theology. For this presentation, this was just an introduction to human sexuality. If we look at the intersection of sex and faith and the biblical scriptures and what they're saying and how they're being interpreted, and of course, they are also being interpreted depending on who interpreted them and whether they are being interpreted in the culture that created it. So the culture of the Jews, the Greeks, the Hebrews. And so we could do that, but that's for a whole other session where I will have my scriptural references, I'll have the theological background, the theological history in terms of who did the translations and why they chose the translation they chose based on their own background. And that can get a little uncomfortable. That's a hot discussion, it's a hot topic. I could try to keep it mild just so you have an understanding of the ways in which you can use the Bible to support sex positivity, to support sexual well-being and wellness. But this is the grounding for doing that. You need to understand this so that you can then look at what's happening within religions, within Christianity, and within Christianity specifically. I hope that answered your question or your concern. Is there any possible way for us to directly contact you after this meeting is over? Yes, I'm gonna put my number in the chat. You could WhatsApp me. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook. All right, back. Yeah, sorry about that, folks. Right. So O. Henry Consultancy Services. You can find me there on Facebook. My website is currently being upgraded. You can still visit, but it may look a little bit messy, or some of the knobs may not be working. Easy to remember, onikahenry.com. And I was just told that I have like 10 more minutes that I can share with you guys to answer questions. I can see, yes. So if anybody has questions, and Father Charles, maybe you have questions you might want to ask on people's behalf because they may still be too shy to ask or too uncomfortable even to type it in the chat. But if there are any adults who have questions that they might have got from young people that they weren't able to answer, I am here to respond to that now. So ask while you have me. Right, so I'm seeing another question here. Is a climax and orgasm the same thing? Yes, we use those words to describe the same event or the same sexual experience. And the official definition for orgasm or climax is the release of a buildup of sexual tension. So the sexual tension builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up to the point where it's released, and you feel relaxed and relieved afterwards, and a sense of pleasure, sense of calm. Once you've enjoyed the entire experience, that is called orgasm. Father Charles, I see you unmuted. Do you want to share or ask a question?
Well, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned something about the Western influence on culture.
Yeah.
Along those lines, people instilling their basic understanding on what they believe sex is and what sex is supposed to be.
Right.
And what you have found by that is that the difficulties of particular cultures to deal with those restrictions. And therefore, we find ourselves in situations in a society where unfaithfulness and those level of things at high and causing damages in marriage. And for me, when I look at it, it is simply a misunderstanding of the true value of sex and how sex operates generally in that way. Because for some persons, sex could be simply recreation. That's how it is to some. The church of teachers says it's supposed to be done in a particular context. Well, that's true. I stand firm to that, but it is also very, from a realistic point of view, it could be a natural challenge for anybody to follow the ideals of the church, especially if you're not married or have that sort of relationship. And then there's certain effects on persons, young persons, develop in the developmental stages, in the late teens, 20s, to tell them, well, you cannot, sex for marriage is a sin, but you're married until you're 35 years. But and somehow the other, we have not been able to balance or help young people how to operate in these times, and therefore I find that the church chased the young people away with the ideas by not being there to give them a sort of guidance in understanding the body. Because the body is very powerful, because everything that we talk about spiritually, physically, sexually, it requires the body, the physical nature, and the Bible talks about that. So how does we as church sensitize our young people about the various challenges and the reaction of the body, and help them to understand that it is simple, it is just natural. I think that's what I want to get at. Certain acts are natural. So that doesn't mean that you're the worst person out there, or you're damned to hell and all these different things. It's a process, natural process in the physical body and the physical development. How do we explain that as a church to our members?
Right. So you explain it exactly how you just explained it. That biologically, when you get to puberty or particular ages, there is a huge surge of hormones that's happening in your body. There's nothing you can do to stop that. Outside of doing the unnatural thing of getting medication and hormone treatments and that kind of thing to try to stop it, and that's going to stunt your development and your growth. So preparing them before they hit puberty, so they know what is going to happen when the surge of hormones come, and you let them know when the surge of hormones come, this is what's going to happen, so they don't feel as if their body is betraying them. And because you told them before it happened, they know they can come to you and say, hey, it's happening, and you're also going to give them specific steps or ways of managing it. So when this happens or when you're overwhelmed, I want you to take some time out in your room by yourself, do these breathing exercises. You're going to put your hand on your heart and your hand on your genitals, and you're breathing in a particular way, or you actually tell them you can have your private time to engage in solo pleasure, depending on how that parent or your religious background views solo pleasure. And so when the person asked about the theology, and I said it's a whole other workshop, it's because there are particular messages that the church has given young people over the years that needs to be addressed in terms of, we say the Bible says this, or the scripture says this, and really analyzing those scriptures to see if they match up with what really happens with real people, with real bodies in real life every day. And if you are saying that Jesus was also human and that he was real and he experienced these things when he was on earth in his physical body, then they also have to be scriptural references that don't contradict what people are actually experiencing in their body. Your scriptures are not supposed to contradict your body. If this body is created by this creator who gave these directions and who gave this information. If there's a contradiction, then something is wrong with the interpretation, because the body can't lie. We can lie to ourselves and our brains. We can interpret things how we want. We can have a particular attitude, but the body cannot lie. The body will do what the body will do. The body is designed to do things in a particular kind of way. And so it really is a choice. And this is going to be a controversial thing to say, but I'm offering it to you and you could completely reject it if it doesn't fit. But the way there is a choice in how we choose to interpret scripture and then hand it down as a guide to people. Because those words, those scriptural references came from a culture, and they will have multiple interpretations depending on the context. And so those who are preaching and teaching need to look at the options for the interpretation, the different ways in which there's different meanings that these words and sentences have, and see which one actually matches people's real lived lives and the experiences of the biological body that was created. You don't choose the interpretation that is about control. You don't choose the interpretation that is about oppressing. You choose the interpretation that matches what happens in the real world that was created by this divine being. Because when you do that, you can explain it. When you do that, you understand how it works, and then you can give guidance as to how to manage it. If you choose the interpretation that is contrary to what is actually happening, you're not helping people. You're confusing them. You're making them feel bad. You're making them feel as if there's no way out of this quote unquote sin. And that something is intrinsically wrong with them and they can't do anything about it. So they're going straight to hell. They might as well give up because there's nothing about this body that I can change. But if your scripture is explaining as opposed to condemning what is actually the design, then that's not very helpful. That's not very helpful. Yeah. So it is something to think about.
We can find ourselves. We can find ourselves in a situation based on scriptures from there's a two form of interpretation from. Let's call it eisegesis, and one is exegesis. And when you look at it, some people put themselves into the scripture itself, and sometimes they even place their own personalities in the way that they explain it to people,
yes.
which could be very, very harmful. And
yes.
during the scripture, the Bible, the same Bible that we read, there are a lot of experiences for and against. And I think sometimes, we have seen great men fall, and we see people living ideal life, we see people living a realistic life and those sort of things. And therefore we got to see something there with the messages, the mixed messages sometimes that we give. Because sometimes we cannot even practice what we preach sometimes. Because this is the real thing here. When I tell people, I just tell my partner, I say, the most beautiful thing God has created is woman, and who's gone wrong with that, their business. But the point is that, but at least for me, somebody beauty will be something else. That's a lot. So that will obviously be something that people want to hear that from the church or hear that from the priest. But this is actually what the conversation we are called to have, because knowing it will help me to deal with it. And this is and so basically that's my point of view for this session, especially.
Yeah. So I'm seeing another message here. I'm going to, if I can read it. If men used to go out and bring home another wife, when did it change from that to now that they can only marry one woman? At that time, did the woman ever feel that they were not good enough because their husband wanted to get another wife. So I don't know when that changed. That will be for those who are theologians and also historians. What's interesting is that we also think that the church history, the things that were preached, the messages that we know now were always the messages that the church preached over the years, and that is simply not true. The church has changed its stance, its beliefs, its messages on various scriptures since the beginning of the Christian era. I mean, and that is obvious in terms of there was a time when there's no way any woman was going to be going up on the pulpit and preaching or could have a role or leadership in church. That used to be the church stance. That has changed. And so I say that to remind you that it was not just, it's not always been one interpretation or one message throughout the history of the church. It has changed, and it has changed as we understand ourselves better, as we understand scripture better and understand the culture from which scripture came. And as we learn whether we are actually applying scripture in the way that it was meant to be, in a way that uplifts all human beings, not some, that uplifts all sexes and all genders and not some. And it is 8:10, and there are 2 more minutes I'll give you before we need to wrap up so I can get home on time. But is there anyone else, or Father Charles, is there anything else, any other comment you want to make, observation based on the presentation?
Well, I think we have one over time, and I want to ask Cordell to give the vote of thanks, because we also have to advertise what you continue. So I'll allow Cordell to do what he is appointed to do.
Okay. Hi, Cordell. Secondary virginity, is that a thing? No, virginity isn't even a thing. That's for a whole other session. Virginity is not even a thing, because not every woman, not every female is born with a hymen. Sometimes if they're born with it, it goes away. Sometimes even if it's torn, it heals. It's not a thing, except it just simply means you had sexual intercourse for the first time and you're no longer a virgin. That's all it means. And that means it's same for men and women. But virginity instead of for women, that's a thing. No, we didn't even all have hymens to be torn to begin with. So that's a myth. I have lots to teach, Father Charles. You need to keep this going. There's so much I have to share. But anyway, yes.
Yes, for sure.
I would start my vote of thanks with that. We thank Father Charles, while we thank Miss Henry for presenting, because I think this is the start of something good that needs to keep going. And as she said, it's a series and a continuation that, and I think this was a stepping stone and a seed planted, and it's really going to work in a lot of minds over the diocese, because it really reached out and it's really thought-provoking. And, as you mentioned, it is a key area for all the young people who are looking on, for all the parents. And as we hope to mature spiritually, this is a very important part of our growth. And as we aim to pass down, as I said, generational blessings. So if we can equip each other, and then, by being informed, we can inform other persons. And then holistically, we would have a better society. So, Miss Henry, you always impress me. And tonight was no different. So I am forever grateful for your presentation, your delivery. And I know everyone here is going to agree with me that we need you back. And we need you here often. So we pray that you will be an asset to us and an asset to your ministry as you aim to develop and expand your knowledge and share it with everyone. So thank you very much from the Parish of Christophers.
Thank you so much, Cordell. Much appreciated. Looking forward to interacting with you guys again.
So I will take up your offer for sure, and I'm sure persons will also take your offer, and very soon I must say, and you could send some information to me, the different topics area, like the one with religion, and the one with this, and the one with that at least I could choose which one I would like to hear, and so on. And I will try my best to, with this team, to see if we could put that as early as possible. So for sure you will get an call, and we hope that we will remain in communication, for I think that what you are doing is an excellent job. May God bless you and what you have offered. May you help all those persons who you talk to discover the true self and not feel less than themselves because of the challenges that they may encounter from a personal and a physical level.
Amen.
May God bless you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
So people, before we leave, remember we continue on Sunday, 8 a.m. We have our Patronal Festival service. Mass starts at 8 a.m. And our speaker, we have a speaker, we're going overseas. This time we heading to one of our parishioners, former parish priest, Canon Andy Moore. He will be our guest speaker on Sunday. So we start at 8 o'clock, and I asked those who have to come and sing, please, we have to start on time because he has a service right after. So you will just only be participating in the sermon, and then he will be leaving. So I want to try to get it to share on many forums, on Anglican Outlook, on Facebook, on our own page, that we could get the message out that we celebrate our festival. So Sunday, 8 a.m., our Patronal Festival, the Feast of St. Christopher, the guest speaker, Canon Andy Moore. Well, I will be the celebrant. So I thank you again for your support. I thank you for your participation in this whole lecture that we have just received. And I pray that looking at it from a more critical mind, that we can continue to grow and support. And remember as we go, that one of the purposes Jesus came was to break down the boundaries that divide us. May God bless you. Have a good night.